Lagos didn't breathe, it pulsed. Even in the stillness of dawn, its veins throbbed with the hum of ambition, generators growling in the distance, sirens echoing from the highway, and street hawkers chanting their survival songs. In the middle of all that chaos stood Daniel Ease, a man who had learned to live without noise. Daniel was the kind of man who could walk into a room and instantly disappear. Not because he was small or unremarkable, far from it, but because he had mastered the art of silence. His presence was felt, never flaunted. He had once been a soldier, a loyal one, until betrayal from within the ranks taught him that loyalty was a currency too expensive for corrupt men to afford. Now, he worked for the Lagos state government, head of personal security for Governor Colonel Obafemi, a man more feared than respected. Daniel's job was simple: protect the governor, his wife, and their secrets. And secrets, they had plenty. He'd seen enough to know that in politics, love was often a transaction, and truth a weapon. So, he built his own fortress inside, no emotions, no attachments, no distractions. Until she came. That morning, the sky over Ikoyi was pale gold, soft and deceptive. Daniel stood by the balcony of the government house, surveying the grounds with that sharp soldier's gaze. His earpiece crackled with the routine reports of the security team, all clear. Then came the sound that always caught him off guard, the click of heels on marble. He turned, and saw her. Mrs. Chioma Obafemi. The First Lady of Lagos State. The woman every tabloid worshipped and every gossip envied. But none of those people saw what Daniel saw. Not the graceful movements choreographed by etiquette. Trainers, not the fashion glossed by luxury magazines. He saw the fatigue behind her poise, the quiet sadness that no jewelry could hide. She smiled faintly when their eyes met. "Officer Daniel. You're always up before everyone else." He straightened, keeping his gaze respectful. "Yes, ma'am. Danger doesn't take a break." She chuckled, soft, genuine, a sound that seemed out of place in that cold mansion. "Neither do you, it seems." He said nothing. Protocol forbade unnecessary conversation. But her words lingered long after she had walked away. That night, Daniel lay on his small bunk in the security quarters, unable to shake the image of her smile. He wasn't foolish, he knew the distance between their worlds. She was power, he was protection. Yet, for the first time in years, he found himself wondering, what does a woman like that dream about at night? And does anyone ever ask her if she's happy? The thought was dangerous. But danger was a language Daniel understood better than love. Mrs. Chioma Obafemi had been the picture-perfect wife for 8 years, calm, cultured, endlessly supportive. The newspapers called her the Pearl of Lagos. But pearls, she often thought, were only beautiful because they were born from irritation, a wound hardened into elegance. Her marriage to the governor was not built on love. It was built on image. On politics. On strategy. Colonel Obafemi was the kind of man who believed emotions were weaknesses. He gave her everything money could buy, cars, jewelry, vacations, but none of it filled the hollow inside her chest. She often wandered into the garden at night, barefoot, just to feel something real. Sometimes, she would play the piano, a melody her mother had taught her when she was young. A melody called Echoes of the Unsaid. And every time she played it, she could sense someone listening quietly beyond the door. She knew who it was. Daniel. He always stood there, not staring, not intruding, just listening. And somehow, that made her feel safer than any armored convoy. One evening, as the final notes faded into the humid Lagos air, she turned and caught him standing by the corridor. "You recognize the song?" she asked, her tone light but curious. Daniel froze. "No, ma'am. It sounds peaceful." She smiled, a little sadly. "It's not. My mother used to say, silence speaks too, if you listen long enough." He nodded slightly, eyes softening. "Then I suppose I've been listening wrong all my life." A moment of silence passed between them, the kind that says too much. Then she looked away, suddenly aware of the line they were towing. "Good night, Officer Daniel." "Good night, ma'am." But that night, neither of them slept easily. The next morning, the governor announced his plans for an upcoming campaign tour across the Southwest. Chioma would stay behind, for safety, he said, though Daniel knew it was more about control than protection. For days afterward, the mansion was quieter, heavier. Daniel's team rotated shifts, but he remained her primary guard. And the more he observed her, the more he saw the truth. Her life was a cage, a beautiful, gilded cage lined with loneliness. One afternoon, while escorting her to a women's development seminar in Victoria Island, Daniel watched how she smiled through endless camera flashes, her composure unbroken even as reporters asked invasive questions about her marriage. "You've always been such a strong support for the governor, ma'am," one journalist said. "What's the secret to a lasting political marriage?" Lips curved, but her eyes betrayed nothing. "Patience," she said softly. "And the ability to pretend that everything is fine." The crowd laughed politely. Only Daniel caught the weight behind her words. On the drive back, rain began to fall, slow, deliberate drops on the windshield. She stared out the window, silent, until she finally said, "Officer Daniel, do you believe happiness is a choice?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. I think it's a privilege, and not everyone can afford it." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You sound like a man who has seen too much." He gave a small, humorless smile. "I've seen just enough to know what not to hope for." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, not in attraction, but recognition. Two souls, quietly bleeding in different ways. That night, Daniel sat in the armory room cleaning his sidearm. He had faced insurgents, kidnappers, and political assassins, but nothing unnerved him like the look she had given him in that car, not desire, but understanding. It was dangerous. It was human. It was real. And for a man who had spent his life living like a shadow, that was the most dangerous feeling of all. He wasn't supposed to care. But somehow, caring had become the only thing keeping him alive. The day began like any other, humid, impatient, and noisy. The kind of Lagos afternoon when the air itself feels heavy with secrets. Mrs. Chioma Obafemi had just finished attending a charity outreach in Yaba. Her speech, elegant and composed, had drawn polite applause from the press and donors. She smiled through every camera flash, thanked every hand extended toward her, and hid the exhaustion that tugged beneath her ribs. By 5 p.m., her convoy was ready to return to Ikoyi. Daniel took the lead car, his hand resting on the radio, eyes fixed on the road ahead. He never trusted traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge, too exposed, too unpredictable. The governor's enemies were many, and some didn't believe in warning shots. "Convoy clear," came the voice through his earpiece. "Maintain formation," Daniel replied. The First Lady's car followed close behind, tinted windows reflecting the restless sunset over the lagoon. The bridge stretched long and lonely, water on both sides, nowhere to run if danger struck. Then it happened. A blue Toyota Corolla swerved erratically 2 lanes ahead, almost hitting a commercial bus. Daniel's instinct screamed trap. "Unit 2, eyes on that Corolla," he ordered sharply. "Driver, maintain distance." The explosion cut him off. A deafening roar tore through the air, glass shattered, flames erupted, cars skidded, horns blared. The bridge shook like it was cracking open. "Down!" Daniel barked, diving out of the lead car. He sprinted through the chaos, smoke biting his lungs, gun drawn, heart pounding. "Ma'am! Mrs. Obafemi!" Her car was veering dangerously close to the edge. The driver, disoriented, bleeding, had already jumped out. Daniel threw himself forward, ripped open the back door, and found her crouched inside, trembling, hands over her ears. He didn't think. He reacted. He pulled her out, shielding her body with his own as debris rained down. The shockwave from a secondary blast threw them both to the ground. She screamed, her voice muffled against his chest, his arm burned, a deep cut from flying glass, but he didn't let go. When the smoke began to settle, he whispered, "You're safe now, ma'am." Her eyes fluttered open, frightened, tear-streaked, and met his. For a moment, the world fell silent. Around them. No sirens. No screams. Just their breathing, tangled and uneven. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice shaking. You're hurt." He shook his head, wiping the blood from his arm. "It's nothing. I've been hurt worse." But her hand, soft, trembling, reached up and touched his cheek. It wasn't passion. It was gratitude. Relief. Human connection in its rawest form. And that was how it began, not with words, not with longing, but with a heartbeat shared between fire and fear. Later, at the hospital, doctors stitched Daniel's arm while security officials crowded the hallway, their radios buzzing. The governor arrived 2 hours later, his face dark with anger, at the attack, at the chaos, and perhaps, at how his wife clung to the man who saved her. "Officer Ease," the governor said curtly, "you did your job well." His tone made it sound like an accusation. "Thank you, sir," Daniel replied, standing stiff. But when the governor turned to his wife, his expression softened, only slightly. "You're lucky," he said. "You could have been killed." She said nothing. Because deep down, she knew luck had nothing to do with it. A man's courage had. And from that day forward, the air between Daniel and Chioma changed, charged, unspoken, and undeniably alive. The aftermath brought new orders. Mrs. Chioma Obafemi would have a personal security detail, one man on duty, always close, always vigilant. That man, of course, was Daniel. He protested, at first. It blurred too many lines. But the governor insisted. "She trusts you," he said flatly. "So you'll stay close." Too close, Daniel thought. In the following weeks, their lives folded into a strange rhythm, an invisible dance of proximity and restraint. He followed her everywhere. Meetings, charity events, church services, even quiet evening walks in the garden. They rarely spoke, yet their silence grew deeper, more personal. Sometimes, he'd catch her glancing at him through the car's rearview mirror, just a flicker, gone in a heartbeat. Other times, he'd hear her laugh softly when he corrected the reckless driving of her escort team, amused by his seriousness. But beneath every smile lay an ache they both understood, the cruel intimacy of knowing you can never have what your heart chooses. One rainy evening, the city was drowning in thunder. The mansion felt colder than usual. The governor was away on an international trip. Chioma sat by the piano, fingers tracing the keys without pressing them. Daniel stood by the door, trying not to watch her too long, but failing miserably. "Daniel," she said quietly. He straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You can relax sometimes. I won't report you for sitting." He gave a small, awkward nod and took a seat by the wall. For a long while, the only sound was the rain. Then she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "Have you ever wanted something you knew you could never have?" He looked at her, really looked at her, the sadness hiding behind elegance. "Yes, ma'am," he said after a pause. "Every day." Her fingers pressed a single note, soft, haunting. "Then you understand." He nodded. "I understand too well." Their eyes met, the kind of gaze that steals breath, not because of desire, but because it recognizes a familiar pain. But Daniel was a soldier. And soldiers know that some battles are lost the moment you draw your sword. He stood, voice steady but distant. "It's late, ma'am. You should rest." She didn't argue. But when he left the room, her hands trembled over the piano keys. Love wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not between silence and duty. Not between a man with scars and a woman wearing a crown. And yet, it had. That night, Daniel wrote a single line in his old, worn notebook, the one he used to carry during his days in uniform: "The heart has no chain, only consequences." He closed the book and prayed the morning would make the feeling disappear. It didn't. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a bullet or a bomb. It's a heartbeat you were never meant to hear. Power has a strange scent, sharp, metallic, and suspicious. When you live in its shadow long enough, you start to recognize the smell of betrayal before it even begins. Governor Kunal Obafemi was not a man who trusted easily. He trusted systems, not souls. Loyalty, not love. And when whispers began to circle through the marble corridors of Government House, whispers that his wife smiled too much around her bodyguard, his instinct was not to ask, but to investigate. It began quietly. A conversation overheard by a personal aide. A passing remark made by one of the domestic staff. Nothing concrete, but enough to prick the ego of a man who had built his empire on control. And so, one afternoon, the governor ordered that discreet surveillance be installed in the West Wing sitting room, for security purposes. No one questioned him. In politics, questions can end careers. Days passed. Nothing unusual, just routine movements, brief greetings, polite exchanges. Until that evening. The footage showed Mrs. Chioma in the sitting room, tending to a small cut on Daniel's forearm. A wound from a broken glass during a power outage incident. He sat still, expression unreadable, while she dabbed gently at the injury with cotton and antiseptic. There were no kisses, no words of confession, just a silence that spoke volumes. A tenderness that couldn't be disguised. And for the governor, that was more than enough. That night, the storm didn't fall from the sky, it came from the governor's temper. How did the storm manifest it? To who was it directed? Was the governor actually right? I don't know what you should not expect because this is a loaded package. My beloved beautiful people. I know this for sure. You don't want to miss the grand happy ending, the confession, the secrets attacks, and the death of a prominent person. Don't be told. Stay tuned for the full story, next.